Hopefully everyone can see that. It's a fairly standard 14-fish dashboard with a few bits and pieces going on, which we'll talk about in some more detail. I think before we get into it, though, I just want to run through a couple of potential issues around logging in, and just to make sure that everyone's comfortable with how they can get access to the site. You're logging in at www.14fish.com. You should have a login already. It would be the same email address that you used to log into the RCGP site. And you have the opportunity to set a password. If you've forgotten your password or need to change it, there's a link on the login page where you can simply click it and it will send you an email with a link where you can then go in and set your password to something else. One issue that we do occasionally encounter is the issue of having more than one account registered on the system. And there are a number of ways that this can happen. Potentially, if you've used the site previously for other activities such as appraisal or some of our other educational resources, it may be you already have a 14Fish account set up. But if this was using a different email address to the one registered with the RCGP, you would have had a new account created using that email address. So we've had a few cases where people have got two email addresses on the system, one of which is connected to the RCGP portfolio and the other isn't. So if you log into the site and you're not seeing the supervisors area, which is this box in the top right here, if you're not seeing that, it may be that you're either logging in with the wrong account or that there is another account that actually is in your name that's linked to the RCGP. Very straightforward for us to sort this out for you. If you just get in touch with our support desk, support@14fish.com, or raising a query through the site, we can merge your accounts for you. We combine the two together, which would add both emails to the same account, and that would resolve the issue. You would then see your trainees appearing on your dashboard. The last thing just to mention at this stage is just a little chat about, or just a point about escalation routes and sort of where to go if you have problems. Obviously, we at 14Fish providing technical support for the portfolio. So if there's something not working or you think something's broken, then please do get in touch with us. If you have a more of a curriculum-based query, or if a date of a review period perhaps needs changing, or you need to be linked to a trainee, these are all very much tasks and functions that can be completed by your local patch and deanery administrators. We've done a lot of sort of work with the patches and the deaneries in terms of giving them the tools and some training and to how to resolve some of these issues. So they have full access to the database that sits behind 14Fish, and they can do anything like CCD date changes, adjusting review periods, and that sort of thing. But I said more technical issues can be raised with 14Fish, and we can help you with those. Okay, so we'll start by doing a little bit of a tour of the front page here. So this is what we call the dashboard. You can always return to this page at any time by clicking the dashboard little home icon in the top left of there. But there's a few things just to look at on this page. First thing just to mention is how to get to My Account. So you'll notice your name will appear in the top right corner of the screen. I've got my Test 3 Supervisor account running here. If you click on that, you actually get a little drop-down menu pops up, and there's a couple of useful links on there. You can go straight into our help center from there, or contact us. If you click My Account, I'll just jump into that now. You can basically adjust your personal information and your details here if needed. You can add additional emails. You can change your main email address as well. So just to let you know, that's an area that you can get to if you need to make any adjustments to your details on your account. Okay, so the two main areas we're going to be looking at as supervisors will be this box here, the entries for review, and then also the supervisors area, as previously mentioned, in the top right. So let's look at the entries for review box. Now this is basically, it'll pop up a notification letting you know that a trainee, one of your trainees, has submitted an entry to you to be reviewed. And there are a couple of ways that you can actually process through these and review them. Probably the most simple is you see an entry here. We've got a supporting documentary entry. You can see who it's from, Dr. Zachary Stevens. And if we just click on the pink text here, which is the link, we can just click on that, and that will take us into the entry. You can see here we have the title of the entry at the top. We can see the review period it's been linked to. And the system is letting us know that this entry is currently awaiting our review. So we can either read through it and mark it as reviewed, or if it's not relevant to us, if it's perhaps a historical entry or an entry pertaining to a trainee you're no longer supervising that's come across when we migrated the data, you can dismiss review requests as well, and that will make them disappear from your dashboard. As we scroll down, we can see the trainee's name and then details of the learning log. You can see here also that the trainee has attached a file to their entries. Most entries will allow you to attach a file in the same way that you would attach a file to an email, and you can click on that file to view it. As we scroll further down the page, we can then see two sections for clinical experience groups and capabilities. And we can see here that the trainee has already added a clinical experience group, urgent and unscheduled care, and they've also added a couple of capabilities for this entry, working with colleagues and teams, community orientation. Now, as a supervisor, you can actually modify, edit, add and remove any of these pieces of information that the trainee has added if you think it's inappropriate. So you can actually select additional clinical experience groups from this list here and add them, and you can just remove anything that they've added there by just clicking on the little X next to it. So you've got a lot of control there if you feel that, to sort of steer the trainee in terms of the clinical experience groups and capabilities. Looking down into the actual capability section, so obviously up to 3 capabilities can be linked to an individual piece of evidence. And again, you can actually see what the trainee has added. You can delete that capability if required. You can add another one, and you can actually modify what they've written by clicking the little pen icon here. So if I just click on that, for example, with that one, you can see here that we can actually add justification, etc. there. That in this case, the trainee's not added any justification or narrative, but we can certainly add some text in there. And then click save. We've also included a little link to the word descriptors for the ratings, just to help guide you in sort of the kind of things to be looking for. So you can see here there's word descriptors for the various different ratings that you can give. And those can certainly form the basis of your justification, although I would suggest merely copying and pasting those is not really sufficient. There'd be an expectation of a little more expansion on what the justification you want to give for that particular capability. Now, when we add justification for a capability within a piece of evidence like this, when we're reviewing an entry and adding information to the capabilities, it's important to remember that anything we add as our justification in this section here, we'll actually pull through into the ESR. So it means that when you come to complete the ESR document, you're not having to type this all out again. It will be picked up, and if you include this entry as a piece of evidence, it will actually copy that text that you've added for your justification and put it into the main narrative box for justifying that capability. So it's quite a little time saver. I'll show you how that works in a moment when we get into the ESR proper. But it's basically a feature that means that as you go through, as you're reviewing entries, you can actually build up that ESR as you go along. So it's very much a case of an ongoing process rather than being a big piece of work to be completed at the end of a review period. Once you're happy with the clinical experience groups and capabilities that have been included, you can then come down to the bottom and click Mark as Reviewed. And again, you've also got the option there to dismiss the review if it's not relevant to you. Okay. So that's the sort of probably the most straightforward way of reviewing an entry, but there's also a couple of other ways that we can approach this. So particularly if you've got a large number of entries, you can actually come down to the bottom of this box and there's a link here, go to your entries for review. So if we just click into that, you can actually see that this is listing all of the trainees linked to this supervisor and the entries that are requiring a review. You can actually filter them by specific trainees. So if we just wanted to look at Zachary's entries, it would show us there, or we can view all of them. And again, if you've got a larger list, you can actually set review all, newest first and oldest first. That'll just jump you into the first entry. And as you mark it as reviewed, it'll just skip you into the next one. So you can very quickly just click through, going through each of the entries awaiting review in turn. And you can mark them reviewed sort of as an ongoing thing. You've also got the option to dismiss select here. So again, if you've got a large, I think this is probably less of an issue now, we're a bit further away from that original data migration, but if you do have entries on your dashboard asking you to review entries that are no longer relevant, again, for historical trainees or trainees you're no longer supervising, you can actually bring up this list here. You can select next to all the entries that you want to get rid of, and then just click dismiss selected, and that will just get rid of all of them in one go. So that's a bit of a time saver if you do have a lot of those older review requests sitting on your dashboard. Okay, So that's the entries for review section. So that's more of the sort of the day-to-day. That's you'll see those reviews coming in. But obviously, in order to get a little bit more detail on the trainee, to get into the detail, we can actually view the trainee's portfolio as well. And the way we do that is via the supervisors area. So the supervisors area appears in the top right corner of your screen. And it'll list all of your trainees on the front page. Now, this is really important to remember because we get a lot of emails about this. But basically, once you've completed an ESR, you may see your trainees disappearing from this front page. Now, that does not mean that you're no longer linked to that trainee. It just means that that trainee is now moved into a different section on your supervisor's area. They are now in the recently completed ESRs section. And in order to be able to view those, you just click into the supervisor's area. So if you're ever looking for a trainee and you can't see them on the front page, the first place to always look would be to click into the supervisor's area here. And that will actually show you all the trainees that are currently linked to you. And if they've recently signed off an ESR, there'll be a box appearing down here above this little awaiting assessment invite box. And it will just be labeled recently signed off ESRs, and you'll be able to view any trainees that you've recently signed off in there. So I think that's a really important point to remember, that if you can't see them on the front page, click into the supervisor's area and you should then be able to find them. We've added a little extra link on that box now with a little view more option. So hopefully that's going to be a little bit clearer for supervisors going forward. So once we've found our trainee, we can either click into the supervisor's area and click view from here, or we can just do it straight from the dashboard if they're appearing there. We just click on that trainee's name and can actually then view their portfolio. So if I click on this trainee, we then are looking at their portfolio view. And this is very much what the trainee would see as well. It's essentially a mirror image of what the trainee's portfolio looks like. And we can instantly have a good overview of the work they've done for this review period, the learning logs, assessments, etc., and their progress towards their ESR. Okay, so first little bit to just have a look at here then is the learning logs. So this is reasonably self-explanatory. It's a list of all the different learning log categories that the trainee has started adding to. We can actually click into one of these categories and we can see a list of those entries that they've created. We can see if we've reviewed them or not, and we can always click back into them and to actually view the entry itself if needed. You'll notice down the bottom as well, it's also flagging up there's 11 entries not in this review period, so you can actually view those. It may be that the trainee has created entries but has not linked them to the current review period. So that's a good place to spot. If the trainee thinks that there's something in there that you're not seeing, it may be that they've just not added that to the current review period, and they can just do that from their portfolio. On every category of learning log and indeed the assessments, we've actually added a bit of information at the top as well, just on what is a clinical case review in this case. Generally more for the trainees' benefit than supervisors, but I think particularly for some of the assessments, which I'll show you in a moment, it can be quite useful just as a little reference guide, just to be clear on what the requirements are for that particular assessment and who should be doing it and when. Okay, so that applies for the various different types. Again, we can click into supporting documentation, CPD. Again, there's a little explanation around it, and we can see that there's a review there currently showing as requested, so it's not been reviewed yet. And again, we could actually click view there and go in and review that entry if needed. Okay, we'll talk about the ESR preparation in a moment, because I think that's the kind of the core bit of information that we really need to get across. But I just want to talk quickly about the educational assessment section as well. Similar to the learning logs, you can see the various different categories of assessment are listed here, and you can see here very clearly the number of assessments for each category that they've achieved, and that will tell you the number they are supposed to be doing for that period of time. Now, trainees can request assessments as they could do on the old portfolio. They can generate a ticket and request an assessment from you, or you can set up an assessment for that trainee by clicking the new entry button here. So if you just click into that, you see it pops up a little screen with the various different assessment types that are available, and you can just click on one of these to set that assessment up for that trainee. Okay, moving on down the page, there's just another couple of bits to quickly touch on. We have the compliance passport here. This is where the trainee can upload their mandatory training documents, Form R, COVID declaration, safeguarding, etc. It's very important that the trainees add their relevant documents and certificates in this area because it then it's visible to administrators, TPDs, educators, and of course the GPSA team. If trainees have added these various certificates as learning logs or supporting entry information, they are still on the portfolio, but they're a lot harder to find on the database. So we are suggesting that the trainees need to add their documents in these slots. They then appear on the front page of their database record and are then visible and available for educators to view. Last little thing on the front page here then is just the time out of training box, TOOT box. This is just an area where trainees can enter any time out of training that they've had. It provides a guidance really for administrators to ensure that that's tallying up with any time out of training that they have recorded, and it basically just appears as a little block on their training map, which I'll show you at the end, just indicating that that's the time out of training that they've had. Okay, a few other bits on this page that we can just touch on before getting into the ESR itself. We can, if we just look down here, we've got the PDP. So this is showing the sort of ongoing PDP that the trainee is working on. So this is PDP goals for this review period that would have been agreed at the previous ESR. And as they progress through, they can mark them as complete. You can see that they're ticked or incomplete or have been rolled forward to the next one. You can also see previous action plans. So these are obviously similar to PDPs, but specific to a capability. And again, you can see any action plans that have been agreed with the trainee from the previous review period. And there's a chance to reflect on the progress towards those items in the ESR, which we'll come to shortly. Scrolling down the page, we then have exams. So this is a summary of the exam bookings, attempts, and results that the trainee has undertaken. And these results are updated by the college and as the trainee progresses through their exams. So you've got a very quick sort of reference there as to how they're progressing towards those various exams. We then have multi-source feedback, pretty self-explanatory, shows a green icon shows that it's a completed feedback. A blue icon indicates that it's started but has not yet been completed and submitted for review. And if we actually click onto that feedback entry, it'll take us into the summary of that feedback. We can print off a PDF summary of the report if we'd like, and it will show you the comments and the ratings, etc. Last bit on this page then is the Educator Notes. So you can read any previously added Educator Notes here. If you want to add a new one, if you just mouse over the top sort of title bar of the Educator Notes there, you see a little plus icon appears. You can just tap in there and you can add your own Educator Notes there. Title, date, any notes. You can attach files if required as well, and then just click Save. You can also see how many, if the trainee's actually read the Educator Notes, so it will indicate if they've not read them, which can be useful. But it is worth noting that trainees can see any Educator Notes that are added to their portfolio. Okay, so if we now take a look at the ESR preparation area, and so that is represented by this box here. And what we can straight away see is there's a sort of you can view progress towards the ESR looking at these two graphs. So basically we're looking at a chart of capabilities and clinical experience groups. And these charts are populated by these little grey and green blobs, which we would call lozenges. And basically, it just simply indicates a grey lozenge shows that the trainee has created a learning log, a piece of evidence, and has a link to capability to it. That will then turn the lozenge grey. In order for it to turn green, it then also needs to be rated by yourself with comments added. And once that's done, once the capability has been completed, it'll then turn green for that particular piece of evidence. And so as you sort of progress through the review period, you expect this to start off with grey blobs. They would start turning green as you move through and review the entries and review the capabilities. And as you come to the ESR, you'd expect that chart to be full of green dots. In a similar way, the clinical experience groups, a little bit less complex than the capabilities, given that these are just something that are added. There's no sort of additional justification or narrative required. So again, as each clinical experience group is linked to a piece of evidence, a green blob will appear in this chart. And again, you'd expect to see that pretty full as you approach the actual ESR. A couple of other bits of information that we can get here. We can click into requirements. That will actually just talk through the work-based place assessment and requirements, how they're worked out. It's based obviously on the trainees' LTFT percentage, etc. And that will then generate this table here, which indicates the number of assessments they're required to do in each ST year and for the current review period and how they're progressing towards those. You can also see here we've got action plans and new PDP entries. So this is where the trainee is basically submitting their ideas for the following review period. So proposed action plans, proposed PDP for the next review period. I think if we click into the action plans, it will just take us into the ESR and we can go down and look at them. So we'll actually come back to that in a moment. But certainly if we click into the PDP entries, you can see here, this will actually show the PDP ideas. And we have a little text here. So this section is where this trainee has suggested their PDP goals for the next ESR. It can include new entries as well as existing uncompleted goals that have been rolled forward. You can then read through these here. And when it comes to completing the ESR and you have the ESR meeting, you can actually agree which of those ideas you want to progress as to be, the PDP goals for the following review period. Okay, so to actually get into the ESR itself, to start completing it, we click the Prepare button here. So if I just click onto that, that takes us into what is essentially the ESR form, which may be sort of familiar to you in some way, in that the information contained is sort of everything that you'd expect to see in the ESR. So if we just sort of scroll through down from the top, you can see that it obviously has basic demographic information about the trainee, their current post, their percentage of full-time and their current stage of training. We then have a date for the ESR, showing that it's the first review in ST2 and dates of next and previous ARCPs. You can then see as well here, this is a relatively new feature, which is the interim ESR. And you can actually toggle between whether it's an interim ESR or not by using this little change button here. So I've currently got it set as no, but if I click change, you can see here, it gives us a bit of information about interim ESRs. It indicates when they should be done and when they should not be done. And then you have the option here of either setting it to be an interim ESR or not. So if I click yes there and click save, that will then take me back to the ESR here, and you can now see it's showing yes on an interim ESR, and that slightly changes the requirements that you need to complete for this particular review. Fundamentally, for an interim ESR, there's no requirement for you as a supervisor to rate and provide narrative on the capabilities, provided you are happy with what the trainee has rated themselves. Whereas in a full ESR, the expectation would be that there would be a rating and a justification from yourself, which I'll show you in a moment. So in fact, yeah, let's change that back to a full ESR. Okay, so the next section down we then see is, it's actually a very useful little sort of to-do list. It's the to be completed before sign-off. And you can see here it'll list various sections of the ESR that need to be completed before you're able to sign it off. Anything that appears in red with a little exclamation mark, that's something for you to do. If it appears in black, it's something for the trainee to complete. So you can see here there's a few bits and pieces: complete the review of PDP, action plans, etc. But then we've got in the black text here, the trainee needs to rate and mark as finished all the capabilities, and it actually lists the capabilities that they still need to rate and complete. And then, of course, because we're doing a full ESR, it's now popped up something for you to do as a supervisor, which is also rating and marking as complete all the various capabilities. You can see at the bottom as well, the trainee also needs to add some action plans. So if we scroll down and look at the capabilities, you can see here the next section down is a table that lists all the different capabilities that the trainee needs to provide evidence for. And as they add their, link evidence to these capabilities and add their ratings and add their justification, this table will start to fill up. So if we take, for example, communication and consultation skills, you can see we have a rating appearing for the trainee and a little speech bubble here indicating that some text has been added. And you can actually mouse over that and it will pop up the summary of the text that's been added. So if we just click into that one, what we can see then is that we can add our rating here, NFD, and we can also add some details there. And then we can add some evidence to support our rating. However, as I mentioned previously, if you have already added some justification text, some narrative to a capability as part of reviewing an entry, if that entry is included as evidence for the capability, that text will automatically be ported up into this area. So it'll start populating that text box with information. You won't need to type it all out again. So I don't know if we've got a suitable one we can do here. Actually, I'm just going to find a different capability because there was one I found earlier which was a bit better. It was this one. Okay, so I think, for example, if we just look at the top here, so there's nothing in that box. I think if we include that as evidence, yeah. So I've clicked include as evidence for that piece of, for that, in this case, it's an MSF. And you can see here, we've actually got a little green bit of text pops up saying we've copied the text you've entered as your justification when linking the capability into the box above. You can leave it as is or build it on it to add further details. Either way, you need to press save to save the changes. So if I now scroll back up to the top, you can now see that it's just copied across some basic information about that colleague feedback. However, if this was a learning log or a piece of supporting information and you know, you've written a proper chunk of text, that text would be pulled into that box to form the basis of your justification for that particular capability. If you sort of want to pause it through, you know, midway through and come back to it, you can click save. Once you're happy with your rating and your justification, you can then click save as finished. We have included the word descriptors again here, as mentioned before. So again, you can use those as the basis to sort of justify your rating. Okay, so it's simply a case of working through these capabilities. So when you come to the ESR, what you would expect to see is obviously the trainee would have rated all of their capabilities, would have added some justification. We would then see ratings from yourself appearing down here, and again with a little speech bubble indicating that there's that you've added a justification for that particular capability. In order for the trainee to sort of finish a capability and sort of mark it as complete, once they do that, it locks the capability for any further editing. So once they've said, yeah, I'm happy with my rating, I'm happy with my justification, a little padlock symbol will appear in this column here, just indicating that the trainees said, yeah, that's it, I'm happy with it, that's locked. Now, obviously, occasionally what we'll find is that a trainee will then subsequently realize that they've perhaps not added an action plan, or that they need to add some additional information to that entry, or possibly it's not appropriate and something needs to be changed. And it's actually very straightforward for you to do that as a supervisor. If you have a locked capability here, you would just click into it, and at the top of the page, you would just have a little unlock icon just up here, and it would just say unlock for trainees. So you can just click that there, that then unlocks the capability, and the trainee can then continue to edit what they've put for that particular capability. Again, once they've finished, they'll then click save and finished, and that will lock it again, and the padlock icon will reappear on that chart in the ESR. So again, as we're approaching the ESR, what you'd expect to see is a full column here, narrative for everything, all padlocks, then your own ratings and your own narrative appearing next to that. I said once those are all complete, the capabilities section will be done, and these bits will disappear from the to-do list. There is a bit more information on this table. You can actually see the number of learning logs that have been linked to a particular capability, any assessments and MSFs. So again, just gives you a little bit of an indicator of what evidence has been put together for each capability. As we scroll on further down the page, we then have the various sections, and again, you can see from the to-do list, you know, it's pointing out these various bits, quality of evidence review, for example. You can actually click on them from that to-do list, and it will jump you into the section. Alternatively, you can just scroll down the actual document itself and just edit these sections using the little pencil icon here. So if I just click on that, you can see it takes us to the same page, and we can then start filling out these various boxes. So quality of evidence review, assessment progress, and it's usually pretty straightforward, a date, and just has the trainee completed the required assessments, etc. Action plans is the next section. Again, you can see any action plans that were set at the last review will appear here, so you can just double check on those. And you then have the opportunity to reflect on the progress. So have the action plans from the previous review been achieved? If not, why not? That sort of thing, and any additional comments you can add as well. We then come to setting action plans for the next review. And again, you can see here that this is an action plan that the trainee has submitted. They've only submitted one, so you'd expect to see at least another two, at least 3 action plans per ESR and a maximum of 5. So again, those can then be agreed with the trainee, and if needed, you can modify them here, adding additional objectives or tweaking the wording as required. We then come down to the personal development plan, the PDP, and similar to the action plans, you can see here we have the goals set at the last review with the target dates. You can see that the trainee has indicated whether they've completed them or not. You can actually view those PDP entries in more detail by clicking View. And once those have been sort of reviewed, you can then actually come down to the reflection and progress, and again, comment on the progress made to previously agreed PDP objectives, and you can comment on the quality of the PDP as well. And again, to edit that field, it's just hovering over the little pencil icon, clicking into it, and that takes you into the section where you can actually type these bits out. Okay, last job to do then with the ESR is then just to agree some PDP items for the coming review, for the next review period. And the way we can do this, you can click into the Manage the Agreed PDP, and this will show us the ideas that this trainee has come up with. And again, you can see here, Zachary has come up with 2 ideas. You may wish to use these ideas to include in the agreed PDP, or you can choose not to progress them if you think they're not relevant or not appropriate. But basically, you can read through them here, and you have options. You can either create a PDP entry from this or don't progress this idea. So you can just work through those that have been suggested and make PDP items out of them or not. And then you can also see PDP entries from the last review that have not been carried forward. So you can basically set up any PDPs that you want to for the following review period. If the PDP ideas are not sufficient, or you want to add some additional ones, you can also come down here and add some new PDP entries by clicking the link. The last little section we'll see then is just the declarations. So these are the health and probity declarations that you would expect to see present on the trainee's portfolio. Once you've checked those, basically once all these sections are complete, you can then scroll back up to the top, and a big pink button will appear here with sign off the ESR. You simply click that. That then completes the ESR, signs it off. It will then send a notification to the trainee, letting them know that their ESR has been completed, and for them to check and review it and sign it off themselves. So that's the basic process for signing off. When you complete an ESR as a supervisor, you will also then receive a prompt to basically set up the next review period. So you can set the next ESR date, and that will generate a new review period for the trainee to start adding logs, assessments, etc. too. In some cases, your patch administrators may have already set up review periods. In that case, it will automatically default to the previously set up one, but if there isn't a new review period for the trainee to go to, the system will then, as part of that process, will generate a new review period for that trainee. Okay, so if we just, that is the essence really of the ESR. When you're within the ESR screen, it's just worth noting you've got these buttons at the top here, so you can actually jump into sort of various different areas of the trainee's portfolio to get a bit more information. So, for example, we can click into spread of entries, which provides some analysis of the trainee's progress. You can see here that it's a sort of a pie chart representation of their number of learning logs and pieces of evidence that they've linked to the various different capabilities and clinical experience groups, listed below as well. And it'll also indicate if there's any learning logs in the portfolio that are not linked to a clinical experience group or a capability. So you may find a situation where a trainee's produced a lot of evidence but hasn't necessarily linked it to the right capabilities or to the clinical experience groups. So if you're seeing large numbers appearing down there, it may just be a question of a little steer for the trainee to let them know they need to make sure that they've linked their learning logs and their evidence to the different capabilities and clinical experience groups. If we just go back, we can also see what else have we got? Yeah, so progress towards entry requirements. Again, that just jumps us back to that requirements screen if you need to check that. And also assessment scores over time. I'm not sure how well that's going to look on this particular trainee because I don't know how many, but basically this provides a sort of an overview of their progress towards various different assessments over time, showing how their sort of ratings and performance has changed over time, so you can get a bit of a read on their progress. And you can search various different assessment types there. Okay, so yeah, that's the basis of the ESR. The last little bit I just want to sort of talk through is just a couple of bits on the trainees portfolio page again. So the first thing just to mention is the all entries search. So this is basically a function that allows you to search all the entries that the trainee has added to their portfolio. And again, it's quite useful, particularly for trainees struggling to find things that they maybe saved on the old portfolio and now can't locate. Or alternatively, if they've created a learning log and they can't find it, it's always in there somewhere. But this basically provides a filterable search of all their entries. If you just click search with no filter set, it'll bring up all of their entries. And you can see there's everything's in there: ARCP outcomes, ESRs, planning meetings, Educator Notes, everything that's been added to that portfolio can be accessed via that all entries search. And you can just click view to actually have a look at any of those entries. The last button then, really just to have a quick look at, is the training map. So this is basically, again, another sort of graphical representation to get an idea of how the trainee is progressing. So essentially it is illustrating sort of progress along the x-axis here, and you can see that the various elements of the trainee's portfolio are indicated by different coloured lozenges. So we have posts indicated across the top. We then have these spans indicating stages of training. These blobs below showing and each terminating in an ESR is indicating a review period. And you can see there's various ARCPs at the bottom as well. There's also things like CSRs, MSF, AKT, and CSA results as well. Now, the way that this map works is it's what we've got called a contextual panel below. So anything we click on up here will change what we're seeing down here. So for example, I'm currently clicked on that GP post. It's showing me some details of that post. If I click on the next one, the geriatric medicine, again, you can see the dates, the amount of actual scheme days they're working, etc. And likewise, we can click on a stage of training, or we can click on a review period. And actually for a review period, we can get a bit more detail. So if we, for example, we've got a completed ESR there, we can actually click view, and that will hopefully show us, the summary of that completed ESR. Likewise with the MSF, we can click on that, view summary, and it will show us the actual NSF results that were added there. So again, it's sort of useful in two ways. First of all, it's a good sort of quick way of getting into different bits of information that you want to look at for the trainee's portfolio, but also gives a useful overview, I think, of the general progress that the trainee's making. Obviously, green lozenges indicate that something's been passed and completed. Grey means that it's either not been yet completed or is underway, and orange indicates either something's been failed or it's been referred to panel or needs further work. So, I guess a trainee that's had a very smooth passage through their training, you'd expect to see quite a clean line of posts, stages of training with a couple of ESRs under each and ARCPs each year. Perhaps a trainee that's had more challenges, you would expect to see a lot more exam resits, breaks in training, that sort of thing. So again, it's just a quick overview that you can use to get an idea of how that training is getting on. Scrolling down below, you can actually see a more sort of traditional view of the various or sort of the trainees' record of their training. So you can see it split into ST1 and a period of sick leave, ST2, and then ST3, which we've not got to yet. And you can see here that what you'd be expecting to see would be signed off ESRs for each of those stages of training, signed off by the supervisor, signed off by the trainee. Again, we can click view, and we can have a look at any of those previous ESRs. We can also view any panel outcomes, panel results. You can see you get a little download icon there where you can grab the PDF. And then if you look here, this is sort of shows that an ESR hasn't been signed off yet. So we've got this ESR ST21. So once that would be completed, you'd expect to see a green tick appearing there. And then once the trainee signs it off, the green tick will appear in there. I said up until the point that the ESR is signed off, when you click view next to it, rather than seeing the ESR summary, you will jump into the trainee's portfolio because that ESR has not yet been completed. Right, okay. I would say that's more or less it. Just a couple of other little features. I mean, you can message your trainee directly through the site here. If you just tap on that, you can, ping them a message. It's more for sort of general conversation or guidance. And again, just in this box here, you can just see the sort of basic demographic information about where they are currently, what the dates of the current review period are, when their next RCP date is, their current stage of training, their DNE training program, and current post. Okay, so I would say that is the basis of the ESR and the process. So I think we'll pause the presentation there, and perhaps we'll just have a quick look at how we're getting on with the questions. It looks like we've been doing. Let's just have a quick look here. Sorry, bear with me one moment. I'm going to get a slight technical issue, bring up the questions. What I'm actually going to do is stop sharing, I think. I'll do that. Okay, so, wow, so we're making some great progress, 70 questions, gosh. Okay, so we'll take a couple of minutes here just to run through a few of these questions. So let's see, please give details about edit ESR, how to finish ESR, how to start and finish review period. Well, I mean, I think I've more or less covered that throughout the whole presentation. I mean, basically, you know, in terms of editing the ESR, are you referring to sort of editing it after it's been signed off? If an ESR has been completed and needs to be reopened, there is scope to do that. We will generally try to avoid doing that as much as possible. But as I said, if it is a necessary requirement, we can reopen that for you on request. And it basically means that additional information can be added and then would need to be signed off by the supervisor and the trainee again once done. In terms of starting and finishing a review period, as I said, when you sign off an ESR, it will prompt you to start a new review period, and when you complete the ESR, that finishes the review period. Okay, the PDP does not look to me to have a SMART appearance, so sensible, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. I mean, that's very much on the trainee. It's a pretty free text box, so the trainees, you know, it's sort of on them really to, you know, to add the you know, the sort of the content that is required in the requisite format. You know, I think obviously there's not a great deal of structure there, but the trainee can you know, make their goals as smart as they wish. Okay, will you be emailing out this webinar? I missed a couple of points. We won't be emailing it out. I said it has been recorded. I think we're just working out exactly how we're going to share that with everyone, but possibly a link either on 14 Fish or the RCGP website. We'll keep you posted on that and let you know where you can find it. Could you please explain once again how grey bubbles turn into green on capabilities? Thanks. Yes, absolutely. So it'll turn grey when a trainee links a piece of evidence to that capability. That will produce a grey lozenge. In order for it to turn green, it needs to have the ratings completed by the trainee and by the supervisor. We do actually have a very good help page on capabilities and how to turn the lozenges green. So if you're on the site, if you just click down in the bottom right corner of the screen, that takes you into our help center. And if you just type something like capability or ESR, you'll be able to find a wealth of articles on there that go into lots of detail about exactly how those things work and how they look. Oh, I think actually Jonathan has said he's going to answer this one live, right?
It was just about turning the lozenges green, which I think you've just covered. So it's, yeah, once you've used them as evidence in the ESR prep, then they turn green from grey. But assessments do not turn that capability green. It's only log entries, and it's really just a guide because the trainee needs 3 pieces of evidence per capability, generally for each ESR. So if the trainee has 3 pieces of log entry evidence in the ESR, that we know that, you know, really they've got enough evidence. It is not mandatory to get at least 3 green lozenges in each capability, but it's a good target to aim for. And obviously you might just have 2 or 1, but you've got some assessments that they've also linked in there as well. So you don't have to hit 3. They'll turn green when you attach them as part of a log entry.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so there's a question here from Helen Steiner. What happens to any entries made between signing of the ESR and the end of the post? I mean, once an ESR has been signed off, further entries cannot be added to it. So in most cases, if they're in the middle of their training, you would expect a new review period to be started. I said entries are very much linked to the review period, not to the post, as they have done historically. If it's a final ESR and there's a sort of a gap fallow period prior to their final ARCP, the advice is to just create what we call like a little mop-up or buffer review period where the trainee can then submit log entries, submit them for review. No ESR needs to be completed, but those entries will then be available to be viewed by the GPSA team and others. Okay. So a question, I want to make sure I get the right order here. Okay, so if we remove a capability or clinical experience entry when reviewing a case entry, does it remove the whole reflection which the trainee has added, or can they go back to it in some way to maybe justify more? So basically, yes. I think if you remove that entry, it will remove that justification. So the trainee, I think, would then have to go back and add that justification again. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Jonathan, but that's my understanding of how that would work. If you do remove, a supervisor removes capability from a trainee's log entry.
Yeah, so if a supervisor removes a capability from a log entry, it will go into the, whatever narrative they've written will go into the private, sort of the comments underneath. So it's always worth explaining to them why you've removed it. So I would say, I don't think this does demonstrate communication skills, either because you haven't elaborated enough, or because I think it's a different capability. So they know why you've removed it. Any narrative, as I said, that they've written will go into that bottom part, and then they could use it again in another capability, or you can copy and paste it if you think actually it demonstrates another capability into that other capability. So it removes that linking and it removes the text, but it doesn't delete the text, so they can use it again if they need to.
Okay, just a question here. How do you create a buffer ESR period or a buffer review period? That's a good question. I mean, as I said, when you sign off an ESR, you will automatically get a prompt to put in the following date. So when you do sign off that final ESR, you will have the opportunity to create that review period there. You do actually have the facility to create new review periods within the trainee's portfolio if you do need to. In most cases, you shouldn't have to, but if you click onto the training map, if you remember the last bit I showed you there, where you could see the graphical representation of the trainees training, there is a button at the top of that page called Create a New Review Period. You can click that, and that will give you the option to set up a new review period if required. Okay, so we've got just a question about the capability areas. Does training have to link capability areas for it to turn green? So no, it turns green once the supervisor has rated the entry as well. Where will the invitation for ESR review appear? So I don't quite know what you mean by that. I mean, basically the ESR is in place as soon as the review period is started. So, there's no sort of separate sort of invitation process. As the educational supervisor, you'll be linked to that trainee, and the ESR is sort of there ready to start being populated from day one of the review period. Oh, that's very kind. So someone anonymously has said, thanks to whoever is presenting this and the 14 Fish team, the new e-portfolio is fantastic. Thank you so much. That means a great deal to us. I said, I know there's been various challenges and it's always difficult when there's something new, but so we've been working very hard to try and make everything work as well as we can for you. And it really means a lot when we get positive feedback. So thank you very much for that. Let's see, can trainees change the capabilities or clinical experience groups once the ES has viewed an entry? If not, then how can we allow this later? So once a trainee has submitted an entry for review and it's been reviewed, it's locked, so it can't be edited. This is really just to try and sort of focus the trainees to make sure that they're sort of doing it right and sort of, before, making sure that they've got everything in there, all the correct information before they submit it for review. However, if they did need to make a change or add some additional information, there's a couple of options. Probably the easiest is for them to simply make a copy of the entry. They can click into any learning log and click copy. That will then copy all of the details of that entry into a fresh log. They can then add additional information, add clinical experience groups or whatever they need to, and then submit that one for review. And then that's the entry that they can actually submit as the evidence. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. There's not really any facility for unlocking entries once they've been reviewed. However, if you've not reviewed it, if it's just been submitted but it's not yet been reviewed, the trainee can retract the review request, and that will then allow them to edit the entry if they need to. Okay. When trainees submit a clinical encounter for review, is there a way of them submitting without locking? As far as I'm aware, no. Just double check that with Jonathan. That's right, isn't it? I think that would apply to any entry once it's been reviewed. It can't be submitted without being locked. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if they submit it to be reviewed and they change their mind, they can, unrequest. So you just sort of gave the term. What's it called? They can retract that request, so they can then go back and edit it. And if you as a supervisor read that log and think actually you need to improve this or change it, then don't lock it off, don't sign it off, send them a message to say retract this request and improve it, and then send it back to me. But once you signed it off as an educational supervisor, there's no going back at that point.
Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, just to follow up, there's another question there. Can an ES go back later and make changes to entries once they've been marked as reviewed? The answer to that is no. I said once it's been reviewed, that's pretty much locked in. But as I said, there is always the facility for a trainee to make a duplicate copy of the entry and resubmit that instead. Okay, possibly another one for you, Jonathan. It's a bit more sort of curriculum based. Regarding capabilities, this is a question from Marcus Van Dam. Should they only link something to a capability when they have actually done it, e.g. in a consultation, or also when they have studied, e.g. in a workshop?
So they can link it as long as there is some evidence and they've got some justification that they've demonstrated that capability. So if they go to a workshop and they learn about communication skills, just because they haven't done it, if they can reflect on the fact that they've developed their communication skills, they're still demonstrating that capability. So absolutely, they can still link it. It doesn't have to be a clinical case review or a demonstration with a real patient for it to count as a capability.
Great. Okay, we've got a few more questions here. I think we've got a little bit of time. I think we'll probably try and round this up around about 2:30. So we'll take a few more minutes to answer questions. And obviously, if there are questions beyond that, then if you just pop us an email into our support desk, we can answer any other additional questions you might have. So the question regarding sick leave. So this is also regarding sick leave. If they are on phased return, when they are considered as back, is it when they are working 50% of normal hours? Bit more of a curriculum type question again, I would suggest. Over to you, Jonathan.
Missed that bit, Adam. Sorry, I was reading there.
It's just a question about sick leave. So if regarding sick leave, if they're on phased return, when are they considered as back? Is it when they are working at 50% of normal hours?
So yeah, generally the GPSA would say if you're working less than 50%, then it wouldn't normally count towards a training. But ultimately, that really is a local decision and an ARCP in your area decision as to what they would accept. But the general consensus and that of the certification unit is anything less than 50% wouldn't normally count towards training.
Okay, right, let's have a look. We've got a question here from Gemini. Please can you change the wording on the CEPS capability, as it currently states that the ES has to have personally seen the trainee examine patients, whereas it's my understanding that it is the responsibility of the ES to check that there is evidence, not necessarily to be the one examining the trainee. There may be an ES who has had the CS as a trainee in their practice, for example. Thank you. Any thoughts on that one from the team?
This has been discussed. I mean, there is a feeling that actually, if a trainee has done 3 years and an ES is signing them off that they are competent in examination and procedural skills, that they should have observed these procedural skills and not just relying on other evidence. I appreciate that during COVID, some of the evidence changed, but this has been discussed in detail at the Workplace-Based Assessment Core Group, and they were keen not to change it at the moment, but it will be discussed at the next meeting in further depth.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so we've got a question here from Jonathan Brown. My ESR preparation view seems to be set to a previous review period, i.e. all green. This is with the review period on the right set correctly. How do I do the current overview? I mean, you can switch between review periods by clicking onto the training map button in the top right, scrolling down, and then you should see that table view of the different review periods, and you can click view next to the current one. And then set that as the current review period. It does suggest, though, if you're viewing a previous review period and you're still able to see the full portfolio view and the capabilities, suggests that the previous ESR may not have been signed off. I think possibly with that one, it may be worth just dropping us an email with some details, and we can sort of double check that for you. Okay, question here from, let's see, from Kamani. My ST3 has had time off sick and is working remotely, so hasn't been able to do SEPs and out of hours. So I wanted this to be clear. I would possibly, I guess, an educator note may be appropriate there.
Absolutely, educator note. Yeah, this is where you would put that, and obviously just informing the deanery and the patch if required. Great.
Okay, my trainees clinic experience groups come up as green lozenges, but the capabilities remain as grey lozenges. Okay, so the clinical experience groups will go green as soon as the trainee links a piece of evidence to them, because there's no ratings or anything required. The capabilities will be remaining grey because the trainee will have made their rating, but it requires you to make your rating as well. Unless, of course, it's an interim ESR, in which case there's no requirement for you to add your ratings and narrative to those. But yeah, once you've added your rating to a capability, it will go green. Okay, do we have to rate capability entry areas for each entry as soon as they are entered, or just before ESR review? I mean, it's up to you, really. I think, you know, the way the system is set up, it's really however you prefer to work, whether you want to sort of just, you know, do it as an ongoing thing, or whether to sort of, you know, hold off towards the end. I suppose, you know, if you're expecting that rating to potentially change or improve over the course of the review period, it's probably worth waiting towards the end to actually make that final rating. But as I said, you can actually add a rating and save it, but not click save as finished. So you can always then amend that rating subsequently in the review period, perhaps closer to the ESR, to reflect you know, any improvement that's been made. Okay, so a question from Catherine Anthony. I have a trainee who I'm in ES2 who will never work with me. This is the case for a number in our training scheme. This makes grading extremely difficult. What are your thoughts? Right.
That's a difficult one, and not one that we've sort of come across, but clearly there's a few people that have said the same thing. Very difficult, because as the educational supervisor, you're signing this person off as being competent for licensing as a GP, and I think having never observed them be a GP, I think that's very difficult. So it's obviously something we need to think about. Obviously your deanery are happy with that because they've set it up that way, but it's not something that we've considered in the workplace-based assessment core group. I will discuss it with the group and see what's said. Yeah. Difficult one. I don't have an answer for that, really. I personally would feel awkward about saying someone is fit to be a GP without ever seeing them work as a GP.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think this is sort of a related question from Deborah. An ES is not always in direct contact with the trainee and reliant on CS to observe examination skills. How does this work then if ES is expected to view? And I think the ES just sort of signs off on the fact that the CS is happy. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you just need to be checking that the CS is happy.
Okay, let's just see how many we've got. A few more questions here. I think if I can just ask, if we can not have any more questions, we'll try and just work through these last few, and then we'll have to call it quits. So we've got, if the trainee hasn't completed the requirements, can you still sign them off, or should they be referred to panel as they still have a few months to go and have been off on maternity leave? Well, I would say that I think the, well, in fact, yeah, it's probably one for you again, Jonathan. Sorry for throwing a lot of these your way.
Sorry, just having a read the question. So if the trainee hasn't completed the requirements, can you still sign them off, or should they be referred to panel? Well, I think you have to base it on the period of training that you're reviewing. So if you're only reviewing a couple of months because they've come back from maternity leave or gone on maternity leave, then clearly they're not going to hit 3 capabilities for each, 3 lozenges or whatever for each capability, or 3 pieces of evidence, because it's a reduced review period and it might be at 60%. So you have to be pragmatic. But ultimately, if the trainee is transitioning, so they've finished one training year and moving into the next, and they haven't hit the mandatory requirements for assessments, then ultimately they probably should be referred to panel. But if they're halfway through, they've just come back, it's a short review period, it's part-time, then obviously the expectations are much less.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so just going back to Gemma's question. So it was not a SEPS request I was referring to, apologies. It was the ES doing the ESR. At the moment, to sign off an ESR, it is worded that the ES themselves has to have seen the trainee examine and not someone else like the CS when filling in this SEPS capability. There may be points where the trainee never works in the same practice as the ES, which means an ES may never have seen the trainee examine themselves, but only the ES and only the ES, but it's the ES doing the ESR. I don't know if that's just, if it's just a sort of a wording thing that we could possibly have a look at, but
yeah, it is a wording thing, and it's really for the last ESR that's the sort of the question for, because you're signing them off as capable as being a GP. So the expectation is, in sort of my perceptions of this, was you know that they're capable of examining, and likely you've seen it before because you're signing them off for workplace-based assessment. But I will discuss it with the group again in more detail. Now this has come to light, because I wasn't aware that some ESs never see a trainee practice as a doctor.
Cool. And then just sort of a follow-up to that one, Jonathan, sort of a question here from Tracy Brady, apologies. You said that the ES has to personally supervise the SEPs. We're a large multi-trainer group practice working across 3 sites, and all partners are involved in supervising the SEPs. It would be impossible for me to observe them all personally. I've not done so for my trainee who's receiving his final ESR in 3 weeks. So there's obviously some concern there, because they have previously been advised that SEPs done prior to COVID observed by others can be used.
Yeah, I'll have a look at the phrase. I don't know that it necessarily is specific to all examinations. Let me just see if I can bring up the wording and check. So if there are any other questions to answer whilst I just look into it.
Okay, great. Question from Amanda: how much does the GPO have to write in their rating section? Is there a guide? So there is the word descriptors. I mean, basically, it doesn't necessarily have to be War and Peace, but I think just a basic justification of the narrative. I don't think there's any specific limits on a word count or anything like that. There may be some more guidance on the RCGP website. I'm not entirely sure on that. Jonathan, is there any sort of guidance on sort of how much to write and what to write for a rating?
There's no guidance on how much to write. I mean, just thinking about how much you used to write in the self-rating for the ESRs before. So I'd probably suggest a line or 2, but essentially the emphasis is the trainee to provide this evidence to demonstrate how they've, to sort of write how they've demonstrated that capability. So it doesn't need to be anything too long. I would personally, I normally write 2 or 3 lines, but I also don't do it for every single capability, because again, the trainee is already done a lot of narrative, and we don't need to be repeating the same work. So if I'm adding a new capability, then I will write more. If I'm just agreeing with what they've put, I might just say, yes, I agree that this demonstrates this because you did this. So it really depends on the quality of what the trainee has written. Just going back to the KEPS thing, it says, by signing off this trainee is competent, you are satisfied that you have seen the trainee examine patients and you have no concerns in their ability to examine patients correctly across a wide range of systems. So it is implying that you have seen them examine at some point, you know, in some systems. It's not saying you've seen them examine all of the mandatory KEPS or every single system examination. But the expectation is you would have seen them examine, because again, you're saying that they're qualified, you know, and capable of being a GP. If this isn't the case in lots of areas, then we will need to look at that again.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so comment here from Nick Timlin. I would expect CS to be able to rate SEPs. I don't think that, well, there's not actually a specific rating on a SEPs, is there?
So a clinical supervisor can complete a SEPS and can rate the trainee as competent for licensing in that particular KEPS. What they don't do is the ESR, which is the overall you know, final sign off for that trainee. But yeah, they can say this trainee is competent for this examination.
Okay, and I just want to just check that we've cleared up this thing for Tracy here. So it's basically, should have framed my comment as a question. Can you confirm that the ES definitely should have supervised the SEPs personally and not relied on SEPs observation of others? I think that's what you're saying, wasn't it? That you'd expect them to see some level of
examination,
but not necessarily everything.
Yeah, but it sounds like in some areas that isn't happening, and if that's the case, then obviously it's up to the ARCP locally to make that decision. But the way that the workplace-based assessments set up these assessments and set up the ESR, the expectation was the ES would have seen this trainee you know, examine at some point. But again, I'll take it back to the group and we'll have to review that if that isn't the case.
Great. Just a couple of comments from Mike Wyndham have popped up here, which may be useful. So he's just pointed out that panels can allow compensatory evidence if a CEP is missing, and also that some SEPs can maybe be completed in hospital attachments as well.
So I think let's put the KEPS thing to bed. So I think that gets rid of quite a few of these questions. Yeah, there's just one last question, I think, Adam.
Okay, I've got 4 open ones here, although I think it's just comments about the
way of submitting without locking. So they can submit, when trainee submits a clinical encounter for a review, is there a way of them submitting without locking? So they can save it, they don't have to submit it for review, and they can then go back and edit it later. If they then want to share it with you, they can retract that at a later date if you haven't read it, or you can bounce it back to them if required.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, I think we're going to make this the last question. So this is from Claire. When I look at my trainee, I don't have any lozenges, but it asks me to add a new training stage. So what that usually suggests is that the trainee does not have a current stage of training set up on the system for them. This is probably something your patch administrator can fix. I think you can actually also set this up yourself if you just from that screen, if you add the date and the stage of training for that trainee. But if you are getting stuck, if you're still not able to get off that screen, if you could just drop us an email into the support desk and we can have a look at that for you if needed. Just a quick one from Michelle, just saying, excellent meeting. Could you repeat on an evening if possible? Difficult at work. Absolutely understand that. We have actually recorded this webinar, so it should actually be available for people to view at any time once it's available. But thank you very much for the feedback. And we've also got another comment here. Thank you. ESR has just been made easier. Well, that's the aim. That's what we're trying to achieve. Okay, I think that will do it then. I think we've cleared the questions. I'm going to quit while we're ahead. So thank you very much for everyone's time today. So hopefully that was a useful session. So it will be recorded and available to you. If you do have queries on a sort of curriculum basis, please do get in touch with your patch or your local deanery. Technical queries, we are available here at 14 Fish to sort any problems like that out for you. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.